Hi, this is Jonathan Dauber, and my project is a socialization and culture workshop. So it is based on, let me show you the project chosen. Again, I chose the option 2 for this assignment, which was the teacher development workshop. This is related to chapter 3 of Is Everyone Really Equal, or IERE, as I refer to it throughout my actual piece, and I believe throughout this PowerPoint. And this is one of the primary texts we use throughout the semester. Specifically, I use chapter 3 because looking back at my reflections, I connected with this chapter the most, specifically the ideas presented. So throughout this assignment, I used the main topics of socialization and culture in order to further what I did in the workshop, but I also used illustrations that were connected to these ideas that were presented in the textbook in order to create the workshop in general, but also provide the methodology and rationale, but also the goals for the workshop presented. So an overview of my workshop in general is teachers will participate in a workshop, obviously, where a main speaker will facilitate group activities and a guide to teaching and becoming aware of the concepts of socialization and culture as discussed in IERE. Now, in my actual pieces, like my pieces that I turned in, I went in depth on my guide and the concepts discussed. I talked about the iceberg illustration specifically in order to establish right away with the teachers participating in the workshop the differences between what's on the surface in culture, what we usually like talking about, such as like movies and social media and just like art in general. And then there are tons of other things on the surface, but on the other end of the iceberg, there's the more unconscious or unspoken rules of society that we are, as you know, ingrained with because of cultural norms. So I use those concepts specifically in order to further explain to teachers the ideas of socialization and culture and how they can affect students, but also just teachers and the teaching community at large. So in the workshop, groups are placed randomly in hopes to expand teachers' networks and promote challenging conversations that they may have missed if paired with familiar colleagues. So along with the main goal of this workshop, which is to help further expand teachers' knowledge on socialization and culture, which I'll go over a little bit later, I think a main goal I had when developing this workshop was placing teachers in, specifically, I said random groups. So like before the speaker or the leader of the workshop would create these randomized groups so the teachers in different grade levels, for instance, so like a third grade teacher wouldn't be paired most likely with another third grade teacher, because I feel like a lot of the time from what I've seen in the classrooms and just from what I know throughout my schooling and everything is teachers in the same grade level tend to interact with each other the most. So third grade teachers interact with third grade teachers, seventh grade, fourth grade, so on and so forth. They all interact with each other. So my goal with this workshop, if it was a larger, a few different grade levels, is teachers will hopefully be placed with their colleagues who they may not work with very often. So during the conversational aspects of the workshop, they're able to talk and gain new insights that they may not have had before, but also have more challenging conversations that may stick with them longer, but also create, as I've said, a larger network where teachers can go to each other in order to talk about these ideas and also keep each other aware. So that's how the groups will be set up. And then the main idea, which I alluded to earlier, is that concepts such as socialization and cultural norms cannot be prevented in the lives of students, but we can strive to increase awareness among school communities, allowing us to recognize the patterns we consciously and unconsciously live by, with the hope that we can all develop a sense of individualism as well as a newfound awareness of our surroundings. So again, this is something that's talked about throughout the chapter itself multiple times, that we cannot, basically, because we're so socialized and the cultural norms are so set in place, and even if we choose to be individualized and have, as the book states, more of the micro lenses, which is more the individual self type of view on life, no matter how much we try to do that and tell ourselves we are these individuals, we are always shaped by our culture in the socialization that surrounds us in some way. But, and my goal with this assignment, as stated here, is basically to show teachers and in turn help them show students how to become more aware of how they are socialized, so they can make either more individualized decisions or try their best to, but also just remain aware, which in the end helps you become more aware of society, concepts that may come up during the class, or schooling and teaching in general, but also just to help possibly over time in students and their families and anyone they may interact with, hopefully inspire them to act against socialization in a way, or at least, become more self-conscious about it. Now, relation to class content, I've already alluded to this. I was inspired primarily and basically altogether by chapter 3 of IERE, Is Everyone Really Equal? And then I also discussed this a little bit, the iceberg and the lens illustrations. So I mentioned the iceberg more so, but the lens illustrations of the micro and the macro really helped me. And I would use that during the presentation in general, or the workshop in general. It would focus on giving those examples to teachers, and specifically in the workshop, it starts off by having some icebreakers. I won't go into those yet, but they're brief icebreakers that relate to these lenses and icebergs. And I thought they were just an effective way of introducing the concepts of socialization and culture. And yeah, so those are the two main lenses I use, but I also use definitions and other things in the chapter. My reflections on making and developing this project, I would say the biggest challenge was developing meaningful activities and a structure for the workshop. So the main structure, I went over the overview of what my goals for the assignment were and the goals for the workshop, but it was difficult to develop actual activities for teachers to conduct throughout the workshop. What I ended up doing was essentially taking out the framework, or at least I should say, I provided a framework for the iceberg. So kind of like giving teachers who are part of the workshop an idea of what this iceberg of norms would look like in terms of cultural norms, like what we see in the culture, and having them come up and converse with each other about norms and what they believe is above the surface, but below the surface, and then talking about that as a group. So that was one activity. And then the other main activity after learning more about socialization and culture was related to each group was given like scenarios related to some sort of normalization or socialization. And they were meant to pinpoint a few aspects of that and how to either correct them or guide them towards more of an equitable framework. Things like that were difficult. I was eventually able to come up with these activities and more of a structure that flowed pretty well, in my opinion. But that was definitely the most challenging part. Two other key reflections I had were that socialization and culture, I already talked about this earlier a little bit, but they can't be stopped, especially immediately. They cannot be stopped quickly, but awareness of these concepts can certainly be improved. So the awareness, in my opinion, and based off my readings and everything else, is important and should be encouraged, even though socialization and culture ultimately cannot be stopped. And then lastly, even teachers can be socialized in the environments they regularly inhabit, which I also alluded to with grade level interactions. And what I wanted to get past from the socialization set through the schools and everything was teachers interact with other grade levels and be randomly generated to different tables or different groups so they could have more of a fresh perspective during the workshop. Now, continuing equity. So this is how, continuing equity. This is how after the project, like this project specifically, like me creating this workshop, but also just the project in general, I think my project specifically helped me discover ways to promote equity and diversity in our mindsets and awareness of our surroundings that can help dissipate some of the negative norms that plague the culture. So we've talked about a lot of equitable practices throughout the semester in terms of helping students feel more seen, feel more, again, equitable instead of equal. And I think this project specifically will help students realize, even though they are socialized and they are part of these groups that are kind of inherent to them by being a part of our culture, they can still, in a way, fight that, or at least be aware of it enough that they can believe in their own individual self and their own individual worth, but also remain members of society and not, I can't think of the specific word, but not like zombies of our society, for lack of a better word, where they're just going from place to place completely based on cultural norm and socialization that they've been ingrained with. So that from my project specifically will stick with me. And then just in general, I think this project helps further thinking and expand course concepts and examples that could potentially occur in a professional setting. Specifically for me, even though we had conversations in class and through the textbook that related to the real world and continuing equity in the classroom, I think coming up with this type of project for myself, and I hope for the rest of the students in this class, it was able to help me like further my mindset and put myself in the classroom in a few years when I'm going to be a teacher in my own classroom, thinking about things like this and thinking of ways to fight past ideas such as, in my example, socialization and culture. And I think that will stick with me also going forward. So that is my presentation and most of what I did for my project. I hope you guys enjoyed this presentation and thank you for listening.